You've probably run into the term scientism, and the term scientism is most commonly to be found in the mouths of evangelical types who are trying to draw some kind of comparison between their faith in the ravings of some Bronze Age goat herders and people's trust and the efficacy of science. Obviously that's problematic, but you'll also find these kind of claims coming out of the mouths of particularly annoying philosopher types who try to undermine science as a way of examining the world in order to cling to whatever legitimacy that they have left. So the term has several meanings. In philosophy of science, it seems to really apply to a kind of hard-headed criticism of logical positivism, which is the idea that only that which can be empirically verified has any real cognitive meaning. And as a position, that's really rather hard to argue with, because anything else you can't know is real. You know, you can only really trust what you can confirm as being true. So as a criticism there, it tends to fall a little flat. It can also be used to criticise where science is applied, where science might not apply. Now, these are arenas such as, say, morals or ethics, where people perceive that it's beyond the scope of science, or the spiritual matters, whatever spiritual might mean, and this idea of non-overlapping magisteria, you know, this is for these things, this is for science. Again, that's difficult to support, especially as we grow more knowledgeable about the way that the human mind works. That's basically rendering psychology and sociology and other arenas of soft scientific inquiry, which are little better than voodoo in a lot of cases. It's slowly rendering them redundant as we can actually get answers rather than speculations and groping around in the dark. So there it kind of falls flat as well. But what you most commonly find it used as is as kind of accusation coming from the religious that science is our religion. They want to draw this comparison, this link between the two. Now, a few times I've had this essay, I wouldn't really call it a paper, by Professor Susan Haack sent to me by both evangelical types and by philosophical types. That'd be a warning to you, philosophical types. You're using the same ammunition as the enemy. And it supposedly talks about 6 signs of scientism, but I don't think it's particularly accurate. I think it's a little bit incoherent. I think different aspects of it contradict each other. But I've been meaning to go through it for a while, since the first time someone had fired it at me, but it came back up again recently, so I thought I'd finally get around to tackling it. So here we go. 6 Signs of Scientism by Professor Susan Haack. Number 1. Using the words science, scientific, scientifically, scientist, etc. honorifically as generic terms of epistemic praise. Science has a very justified degree of trust put in it. I mean, if someone said, I fixed your engine using artistic principles, you would justifiably be worried about whether it would work. If someone said, I prayed for your car engine to start, that's not going to help you either. You'd rather someone got in there and used engineering and scientific principles to fix it. Yeah, we have never launched a rocket to the moon by praying for it. Yeah, Van Gogh didn't find a particular play of light and pattern, or a particular mix of paints that led to cold fusion. This isn't something that happens, you know. So people's trust in science is justified by what science has accomplished, the fact that it works, and so on. People's abuse of that terminology, people's misunderstanding and misuse of that terminology, I don't think qualifies as scientism. Rather, it's people parasitizing and using the trust and effectiveness of science and abusing it. You know, and this happens in other fields of knowledge. You'll find all manner of cod philosophers on YouTube, Stephen Molyneux, and you'll find people claiming religious authority, and they have done down the years to defraud people in all sorts of ways. This just doesn't seem like a valid criticism, people not understanding and misusing a term in order to exploit people's justified trust in science. That's not the character of a religion or of blind faith, and using these terms means something. If someone says that they have scientifically examined a subject, you expect there to be evidence, you expect it to have been peer-reviewed, you expect it to have applicability, you expect to be able to repeat those experiments and to see the same outcomes for yourself, or at least for another scientific team to do it, to confirm it. So there is a justified belief in the power of science, and that's what lends these terms their authority. It's not a baseless authority like, say, religious authority. It's not an authority backed by force, and it's not a fallacy of argument from authority, because it's constantly questioning itself, and there are results and so on. It's all cross-confirmatory, and ultimately it works. So and the whole point of science is that it's the process and the information that stands for itself, not the authority of someone calling themselves a scientist. A non-scientist, if they applied the scientific method, could make discoveries and have them accepted. It's not who, it's what. And so the authority and the reverence in which some people hold science is, I think, justified. Number 2. Adopting the manners, the trappings, the technical terminology, etc. of the sciences, irrespective of their real usefulness. This isn't something that scientists do, this isn't something that fans of science do. And it's not the kind of thing that people who are usually accused of scientism do. What this is what beauty companies do with their laboratoires. This is what people like Deepak Chopra do when they sprinkle whatever they're saying with magic quantum dust. This is people, again, parasitizing upon science, trying to steal the authority that science has because science works. This isn't an example of scientism. It's people attempting to piggyback upon and use what science has provided, the effectiveness of it, the fact that it works. It's them attempting to piggyback on the back of that, like a virus perverting a cell. It's not an example of actual scientism, but people abusing the trust that science has earned. So I don't think that qualifies as scientism either. Number 3. A preoccupation with demarcation, i.e. withdrawing a sharp line between genuine science, the real thing, and pseudo-scientific imposters. And this is where Haack's piece becomes incoherent, because you can't very well complain on the one hand that people are misusing and abusing the symbols, the language, the name of science, and then complain that science becomes interested, invested even, in demarcation, in defining what is and is not science, what is and is not scientific, what is and is not proven by one thing or another. After all, a lot of that is the point of science, determining what is proven, criticizing things, showing that they're not, and applying them in various ways. So if science sets out to debunk pseudoscience, to show that it is wrong, to try and show up how nonsensical a lot of these people abusing the terminology and so on are, that's anti-scientism, and prevents people abusing it, and that's a good thing. So the idea that science shouldn't be interested in policing its reputation, in policing its usefulness, in policing its applicability, is in direct contradiction with the other things that she said, and is the opposite of scientism. It's important that we demarcate what has the authority of science that stems from its methodology and its applicability and its correctness, and what doesn't, when people are abusing it and so on. And this is why skepticism, a skeptical inquiry, debunking, the peer review method, repeat experimentation. It's why all of this is so important, and it's utterly integral to science, not scientism. Number 4. A corresponding preoccupation with identifying the scientific method presumed to explain how the sciences have been so successful. Presumed? It's not like humanity hasn't tried other things, reading guts, casting bones, pondering, praying. Well, what works? What has built civilization? What has allowed us to touch the moon, see the stars, see distant galaxies? What's allowing me to do what I'm doing right now, and what's allowing you to watch it? Yes, science. It works, bitches. What more can you say here? I mean, the scientific method does work. We've tried other methods, they don't work. When you break with the scientific method, it doesn't work, and it has no authority and no functionality. People who start from conclusions, like creationists and a lot of social scientists do, and work backwards, are doing it wrong, and it soon comes out that they're doing it wrong. So, I mean, this is a proven thing. It's a scientifically proven fact that science works, and that's not circular because the way in which science operates, seeking evidence and confirmation. So, what are you even talking about, Professor? Number 5. Looking to the sciences for answers to questions beyond their scope. Well, this rather begs the question, is what is beyond the scope of science? Well, what is the scope of science? And the scope of science, the scope of scientific examination and inquiry, is things that exist. So what's beyond the scope of science is things that don't exist, but then even thoughts exist, and if things don't exist, what's the point of examining them? Anything that does, has, or will intersect with our ability, even our extended ability to perceive it, anything that affects our world is subject to scientific examination. Things that exist, things that are real, even things that are unreal, like people's delusions and so on. These are all subject to science. I mean, those things exist in a degree in that they exist in patterns and chemical balances and imaginings and activity within the mind. You know, so they still have an existence that is graspable by science. So, what is beyond the scope of science? Number 6. Denying or denigrating the legitimacy or the worth of other kinds of inquiry besides the scientific, or the value of human activities other than inquiry, such as art. I don't think this is reflective of scientism, but rather people's personal points of view. Mostly, I mean, I have zero time for sport. I see it as a completely pointless waste of time, but if people want to waste their time, that's fine with me. I work in art, in writing, design, all that kind of thing, and yeah, I value science, and I think on a scientific basis that people are better off if there's art and so on around, and the same argument could probably be made for sport. Even though it does nothing for me, I think by empirically examining the effect that it has on the world, we can see that there's some value to it. Probably not millions of pounds for kicking a pig bladder around a field, but some worth. I think that's possible to point to. As to other kinds of inquiry, what other forms of inquiry are there? I mean, detection in police work and so on relies on the scientific method. History relies on the scientific method. What is there that's a genuine, meaningful form of inquiry that actually produces answers that isn't science or entirely dependent on science? I mean, logic is dependent on empirical observation and science, and forms part of science. Mathematics is entirely dependent on physical observation, empiricism, and upon science. Ultimately, even if we construct imaginary models and mathematical rules and so on, it's all originally derived from counting. I have 2 beans, and I add 2 more beans. What does that make? All mathematics is basically advanced counting. All logic is extrapolating from what we know and have observed in the physical world. This is all contingent upon science. So what other form of inquiry is there that works? And I don't think that there is one. I mean, art and poetry and so on aren't really forms of inquiry per se. They can be speculations. I mean, there's speculative fiction. What would happen if? But that's in turn based on our own observations and thoughts and so on from what we've seen go on around us. So it can be said to be an hypothesis, which is part of science. So even some forms of fiction, science fiction, can be said to be science in a way, or at least it applies to it to that extent. What if is a scientific question in a lot of ways, but I don't want to overextend science beyond what it actually is. I'm just saying that this all relates. So, what other form of inquiry is there that works? That's not scientific. It's not part of science or dependent upon science. You tell me. And finally, my conclusion. A lot of people don't like science, because science actually provides answers, and you should never really ask a question that you don't want to know the answer to. There's a lot of critics of evolutionary psychology, and a counter to that is to characterize their position as the idea that evolution stops at the neck, which is absurd, because your brain and your nervous system, your hormones, everything is all influenced by evolution. Our behavior, our instincts are all affected by evolution. So there seems to be something similar going on here, whereas instead of evolution ending at the neck, it's like science ends at, and then people pick a particular point, and it all seems to be really down to some kind of dread of having actual answers, or different answers, or true answers about gaining knowledge in these areas. Religion is threatened because it made truth claims about reality that turned out not to be true, and all of its authority and everything was vested in that. Philosophy seems to be threatened because science has emerged from and surpassed it, and philosophy seems to be obsessed with minutiae and with trying to stop science from providing answers in other areas. And that strikes me as rather peculiar. It just seems obsessed with casting doubt, not in a useful, good, skeptical sense, but in a solipsistic sense, that you can't know anything, and then science just goes ahead and does something and finds an answer. If I appreciate that I sound like someone who has succumbed to scientism, but the more I have these arguments, the more people try to criticize science in this way, the more I come to understand that it is the best way we have yet discovered to know anything. And that's why the charlatans come up to it. And it seems to be why it threatens the religious and the philosophers. It seems to be why it upsets them. And that just seems weird to me, because my highest aspiration is to know what's true. And so far, science seems to be the only way that we have to determine what is true, what is real, what is actual. I cannot see any other means by which we do so. I mean, there may be some new mode of thought that it also emerges from somewhere that will be even better than science, but at the moment that's what works. And these criticisms don't appear to be of science or of a reverence for science, which, as I've pointed out, is quite well earned. But for these parasites, for the people that piggyback on the back of it, and that doesn't seem to me to be scientism, but rather an abuse and an exploitation of the justified reputation of science. People don't worship science. Science cannot, by its nature, be dogmatic. People do trust it, and not everyone has the mental capacity or the time to check everything that's claimed to be science. But science itself, the scientific viewpoint, the scope and the reach of science, this is proven stuff. And to call that scientism is just absurd. What they appear to be demanding, both the religious and the philosophical, is what Douglas Adams called rigidly defined areas of doubt and uncertainty. And I just can't go along with that. So perhaps, if you're going to call the way I think scientism, I'll just laugh at you from now on. Zang.